It is therefore necessary to show that the foregoing reasons are not necessarily conclusive, and first those which are taken from the agent's side. For it is not necessary that God be moved by himself or by accident, if his effects begin anew, as the first reason proceeded. For the novelty of an effect may indicate a change in the agent, inasmuch as it demonstrates the novelty of the action. For it cannot be that there is a new action in the agent unless it is moved in some way, at least from idleness to action. But the newness of the divine effect does not show the newness of the action in God, since his action is his essence, as was shown above. Therefore, neither the novelty of the effect nor the change of God's agent can show. And yet it is not necessary that, if the action of the first agent is eternal, that its effect be eternal, as the second reasoning concluded. For it was shown above that God acts by will in the production of things. Now it is not so that some other action of his is the middle, just as in us the action of the motive power is the middle between the act of the will and the effect, as was shown in the foregoing. But it is necessary that his understanding and will be his doing. But the effect follows from the intellect and the will according to the determination of the intellect and the control of the will. But just as any other condition of a thing made is determined by the understanding, so is its time prescribed, like a doctor to be given a drink. Wherefore, if his will were in itself efficacious in producing the effect, a new effect would follow from the old will, without any new action existing. Nothing, then, prevents us from saying that the action of God was from eternity, but that the effect was not from eternity, but then when he arranged it from eternity. From this also it is clear that, even if God is the sufficient cause of the production of things into existence, it is not necessary that his eternal effect should be posited, since he exists eternally, as the third reasoning concluded. For when a sufficient cause is posited, its effect is posited, but not an effect extraneous to the cause. For this would be due to the insufficiency of the cause, as if the hot did not warm. Now, the proper effect of the will is to be what the will wills. But if there were something other than what the will wills, the effect would not be posited as proper to the cause, but alien to it. But the will, as has been said, just as it wills this to be so, so it wills this to be then. Hence it is not necessary for the will to be a sufficient cause that the effect be when the will is, but when the will disposes the effect to be. But in those things which proceed from a naturally acting cause, it is otherwise, because the action of nature is according to what it is, so that the cause must follow the effect. But the will acts, not according to the manner of its being, but according to the manner of its purpose. And therefore, just as the effect of a natural agent follows from the being of the agent, if it is sufficient, so the effect of the agent through the will follows the manner of the purpose. From these also it is clear that the effect of the divine will is not retarded, although it was not always by the existence of the will, as the fourth reason supposed. For it falls under the divine will, not only that which is its effect, but that which then is. Therefore, this will which is then to be a creature is not retarded, because then the creature began to be when God ordained it from eternity. Now, before the beginning of the whole creation, it is not necessary to accept any diversity of parts of any duration, as was supposed in the fifth reason, for nothing has no measure or duration. But the duration of God, which is eternity, has no parts, but is absolutely simple, having no prior and posterior, since God is immovable, as was shown in the first. Therefore, it is not necessary to compare the beginning of the whole creation to some different signs in some pre-existing measure, to which the beginning of creatures can be similarly or differently, so that there must be a reason with the agent why he brought the creature into being in this sign of that duration, and not in another preceding or the following. This reason would be required if any duration were divisible into parts, apart from the whole creature produced, as happens in particular agents, by which the effect is produced in time, but not time itself. But God brought into existence at the same time both creation and time. Therefore, the reason why now and not before is not to be considered in this, but only why not always, as it appears in the same place. For particular bodies are produced just as they are at a determined time, so also in a determined place. And since they have a time and a place outside themselves, by which they are contained, there must be a reason why they are produced more in this place and in this time than in another. There is a reason to consider why it was established here and not there. Which reason, because some thought it to be considered, they fell into the error of positing infinity in bodies, and likewise in the production of the whole creature, outside of which there is no time. And to inquire into this, a sixth reason was introduced from the side of the end, which alone can introduce necessity in those things which are done by the will. But the end of the divine will can only be its goodness. But he does not act for the sake of this end to be produced into being, as the artist acts for the sake of the constitution of the thing wrought, since his goodness is eternal and unchangeable, so that nothing can increase to him. Nor could it be said that God acts for the sake of his improvement, nor does he act for the sake of acquiring this end for himself, just as a king fights to acquire a city, for he is his own goodness. It remains, therefore, that he acts for the sake of the end, insofar as he produces an effect for the participation of the end. In thus producing things for the sake of the end, the uniform relation of the end to the agent is not to be considered as the reason of the everlasting work. But we must pay more attention to the relation of the end to the effect which is effected for the sake of the end, so that the effect is produced in such a way as to be more suitably ordered to the end. Hence, from the fact that the end is uniformly related to the agent, it cannot be concluded that the effect is eternal, nor is it necessary that the divine effect should always have been, on account of the fact that it is thus more conveniently ordered to the end, as the seventh reason seemed to proceed. But it is more conveniently ordered to the end by the fact that it has not always been. For every agent which produces an effect in the participation of its form intends to introduce in it its likeness. Thus it was fitting for the divine will to produce a creature in participation in his goodness, so that it might represent the divine goodness in its own likeness. But there cannot be such a representation by way of equality, as an univocal effect represents its cause, so that eternal effects must be produced from infinite goodness. But as exceeding is represented by that which is exceeded. Now, the excess of divine goodness over the creature is expressed chiefly by the fact that creatures have not always existed. For from this it appears expressly that all things besides himself have him as their author, and that his virtue is not obliged to produce such effects as nature is to natural effects, and consequently that he is active and intelligent by the will. Some have held the contrary of these, supposing the eternity of creatures. Therefore, on the part of the agent, there is nothing that compels us to posit the eternity of creatures.